Hello, future coders. My name is Tristan. Welcome to Cyber Spartans, and thank you so much for being here. We are really excited for you to learn some new things. For today's activity, we will be using these chunks of code that are in your kit and putting them together like puzzle pieces. You'll also want to have this Scratch website printout because this is what it would look like if you were on your computer. Putting these puzzle pieces together will allow us to fix the sprites. And if you don't know what a sprite is, it's basically any object or character that you can choose and code on Scratch. For this activity, we will be focusing on the deposit mask sprite and also the mask sprite. Cloning in this sprite will make a copy of a mask. When we finish putting these chunks together, you will be able to do the same thing you did for this activity and fix the project on Scratch called social distancing. And by pressing this green flag right here, you'll be able to see the player run around and collect masks. Are you ready? Great, let's get started. Okay, to start our coding, we're gonna first locate which sprite we're working on, and for this one, we'll be working on the mask sprite that you can find on this right side of the screen. And this is what it would look like if you were on your Scratch website. At this time, let's go to directions number 1, and you can pause the video until you're ready to move on. Great, if you're back, it means that you've read step number 1, and it tells us that we're going to be making sure that all these chunks are in our kit. So it's just chunk 1 to 6, and Y block 1 and Y block 2. You could take a moment to make sure that they're all out. If you have them all out, great. Let's move on to step number 2, which is getting chunk 1 from our kit. And it's labeled like this. When I start as a clone, go to mask X, Y160, show, and forever. Place it down like this. When the mask sprite wants to create a clone, this chunk will be used first. It will move the clone mask to a certain position. Then it will display the mask because when the clone is created, it is invisible. If you got this chunk down, great. Let's move on to directions number 3. And you can pause the video if you need to again. If you have read directions number 3, it just says that we're going to be grabbing chunk number 2, which is labeled like this. If touching player, then change mask by 1, broadcast add mask, and delete this clone. For this chunk, if the clone touches a player sprite, it will increase the variable called masks. It would broadcast add masks, and it will delete this clone. If you found that, great. Let's just put chunk number 2 underneath chunk number 1. That's what our step number 4 would say as well. If you're done with this step, let's move on to directions number 5 and number 6, which says that we're going to be grabbing chunk number 3, which is if touching edge then, and delete this clone. This chunk of code is important because if the clone touches the edge of the screen, it will delete itself. If you found this, step number 7 says we're going to be placing this underneath chunk number 2. There's also one last piece for this set. It'll be Y block 1, and you can place it right underneath this last piece right here. Since this Y block is here, the clone will move downwards, but if the clone does not touch the player, we do not want it to keep moving downward forever because it will slow down our game. So this right here, this chunk, will help stop this problem. If the clone touches the edge, it will be deleted. If you place all these together, congrats! You just built an entire set of code. You are awesome. Let's move on to let's move them to the side for a moment, because step number 8 says that we're going to be developing another set of code that is a continuation from the first one we just did right now, in a way. First we made the masks for the player to collect. Now we're going to be making a place for the player to deposit those masks. Are you ready? Let's do it. So let's go to directions number 9, and you can pause the video if you need to until you're there. So step number 9 says that we're going to be working on the deposit sprite. So it's right here, but I'm just going to move this one over and make sure it's a little bit more visible like that. Great. So this is the sprite we're going to be working on. So if you located it, great. Let's move on to directions number 10, which says we're going to be finding chunk number 4. And this is when I start as a clone, go to X, pick random, show, and forever. This chunk is important because when the deposit box sprite wants to create a clone, this chunk will be used first. It will move the clone box to a specific location as this coordinate. Then it will display the box because when the clone is created, it is invisible. You're doing great. Let's move on to step number 11, which is finding chunk number 5, which includes if touching player then and broadcast deposit. This code will broadcast deposit. This tells the other code in the sprite to deposit the mask. For example, one thing that will be triggered is the big +1 mask on the screen. If you found this chunk, let's move on to step number 12, which says that we're going to be putting this chunk 5 underneath chunk number 4. Did you do that? Great. Let's move on to step number 12 and 13. And these steps say that we're going to find chunk number 6, which is if touching edge then and delete this clone. This chunk is important because if the clone touches the edge of the screen, it will delete it. Let's move on to step number 14. And it says that we're going to be placing this 6 underneath number 5, like this. Which leaves you the very, very last piece, and it's Y block number 2. I'm going to place this right underneath chunk number 6, like that. Congrats! This should be your last step, number 15, which means you finished some code. Again, this code will let our clone in our Scratch website project create masks so that the player would run around and collect. Once you build this code on the Scratch website, you'll be able to play it by pressing this green flag. Remember to keep your mask on when you're outside of the house. It is easy and an important way for us to help our community stay safe and be a civic leader. Thank you.